The story we are looking at today is one that for a long time you really only heard about in the darkest corners of the internet.
Oh, absolutely. It was pure message board fodder.
Ugh.
The kind of stuff that would get you labeled the conspiracy guy at a party.
Right. You'd be the crazy uncle at the table for sure. But today we are doing a deep dive into how that entire conversation has just fundamentally shifted.
It's gone mainstream.
It really has. We're talking about Jeffrey Epstein. But not the standard true crime version of the story we all know. You know, the predator, the island, the horrific abuse.
No, we're going to layer deeper.
Exactly. We're talking about the central mystery that is suddenly being debated on mainstream television in prime time. Was Jeffrey Epstein merely a wealthy, abusive monster? Or was he something else? Was he a state-sponsored intelligence asset?
And that is a massive, massive question. And what's so fascinating is that it isn't just, baseless speculation anymore. The source material we're looking at today includes this incredibly heated, very chaotic debate hosted by Piers Morgan.
I saw that. It was wild.
It really was.
Yeah.
You've got an investigative journalist who's gone through the files, you have Epstein's own former lawyer, and then you have a satirist who basically thinks the whole thing is a giant smokescreen.
So that's the mission for this deep dive. We're going to try and sift through all of that chaos, because usually when we talk about Epstein, we get stuck on the who was on the plane, who went to the island.
Right, the name game.
Exactly. But today, we want to look at the what and the how, specifically the alleged links between Epstein and Israeli intelligence Mossad. We're going to look at the financial history, the strange passports, and the arguments for and against this whole spy theory.
And we have to give you a heads up. The source material here is, well, it's volatile. There are shouting matches. There are legal threats. Some really dark details.
To put it mildly.
But if we can strip away all that noise, and there is a lot of noise, there's a really fascinating narrative underneath about how power actually operates in that gray zone, the space between legal and illegal.
Okay, so let's introduce the cast of characters from our source material so everyone knows who we're dealing with. First up, we have Ryan Grimm.
Right. Ryan Grimm. He's an investigative journalist with DropSite News. And in this whole dynamic, you can kind of think of him as the archivist.
The archivist. I like that.
Yeah, he's the one bringing the receipts. He's the one that actually analyzed the files. He's looked at the history. And he is the primary voice pushing this asset theory. He's connecting the dots back to the intelligence networks of the 1980s.
Okay, so he's the investigator. Then we have the defense, Alan Dershowitz.
A huge legal figure, obviously, and Epstein's former lawyer. His role in this debate is just crucial because he represents the main counter-argument.
And he's not just defending himself, right?
No, not at all. He's defending the logic of the criminal justice system as he sees it. He argues, and very vehemently, that Epstein was just a selfish SOB who would have sold out absolutely anyone to save his own skin.
And finally, the wild card, Bassem Youssef.
The satirist and activist, he's really the outsider looking in on all of this. His whole argument is that we, the public, are being gaslighted. He thinks the way these files are being released is just a distraction, a scavenger hunt designed to exhaust us all.
So we have the investigator, the lawyer, and the satirist. And at the heart of it all is this one core conflict. Was Epstein the perfect intelligence asset with all the means and the motive?
Or was he just a common criminal who would have traded any secret he had for freedom if he'd actually had them?
That is a million-dollar question.
It really is. And to even start to answer it, we have to begin with some definitions, because people throw the word spy around a lot. But in the intelligence world, these words have very, very specific meanings.
Okay, let's unpack that asset theory first then. This is where it gets really interesting for me because Ryan Grimm makes a very specific distinction. He says Epstein fits the profile of an asset, not an agent.
Yes.
Now, to a layperson like me, those sound like they mean the same thing. What is the actual difference there?
It's a vital distinction. It's everything, really. When we think of a spy, we picture James Bond, right? Or, someone on the government payroll. We think of a badge, a pension, a clear chain of command.
An employee.
Exactly. Grimm points out that an agent is someone who, metaphorically speaking, fills out a W-9 form. They have a boss. They get a performance review. They follow orders. If their handler says go to Berlin, they get on a plane to Berlin.
Okay, so that's an agent. What's an asset?
An asset is completely different. An asset operates in the gray zone. It's transactional. It's you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours.
Ah, okay.
Grimm's theory is that intelligence agencies like Mossad or even the CIA, they don't necessarily employ someone like Epstein. It's the other way around. The agency in some ways works for the powerful global networks that Epstein represents.
Whoa, that flips the script entirely. So it's not that Epstein is taking orders.
Not at all. It's that he's useful.
Incredibly useful, I'd imagine.
Think about it. If you're an intelligence agency, you have legal restrictions. You have congressional oversight. You have budgets. But an asset is a private citizen. They can go places you can't. They can move money in ways you can't.
They have plausible deniability.
Total plausible deniability. Grimm argues that if you really understand how power works at that top global level, these figures can almost direct the services of state agencies. It's a symbiotic relationship. Epstein gets protection and access. The agency gets compromised material compromat and a back channel for moving money and influence.
Speaking of money, let's follow it, because that's always been one of the biggest mysteries about Epstein. Where did all the money come from?
The ultimate question.
Right. He was a college dropout who taught math at a private school, and then suddenly he's a billionaire. The math, pardon the pun, never really added up.
It never did. And Grimm, this is what's key. He takes us back way further than most people look. He doesn't start the story with Victoria's Secret and Les Wexner in the 90s.
No, he goes back to the 80s.
He goes back to the 1980s and the Iran-Contra affair.
Okay, let's pause there. For listeners who might not remember the sordid details of the 80s, give us the explain like I'm 5 on Iran-Contra and why on earth a young Jeffrey Epstein would be anywhere near it.
Sure. So Iran-Contra was the biggest political scandal of the Reagan era. In a nutshell, the U.S. government wanted to fund these anti-communist rebel groups, the Contras in Nicaragua.
The Congress said no.
Congress said, absolutely not. You cannot do that. It's illegal. So their official funding was cut off.
Okay.
At the exact same time, the U.S. had hostages in Lebanon who were being held by groups with ties to Iran. So a secret, off-the-books plan was hatched.
And this is where it gets shady.
Very shady. The U.S. would secretly sell weapons to Iran, our sworn enemy, in exchange for their help getting the hostages back. But here's the kicker. They would massively overcharge the Iranians for the weapons.
So they were price gouging missiles.
They were price gouging missiles, exactly. They'd sell a missile that was worth, say, $5 million for $10 million.
And that extra $5 million?
That extra $5 million is pure, off-the-books profit. It's a black budget. It's a slush fund. And they use that secret money to illegally fund the Contras in Nicaragua, completely bypassing Congress.
Okay, so you've got millions and millions of dollars floating around that technically doesn't exist on any government ledger. You can't just walk into a Bank of America and deposit a check for illegal missile profits.
Precisely. You need a network. You need a web of shell companies. You need secret bank accounts. You need people who know how to move that kind of money around the world without raising any red flags. You need financial fixers.
And this is where Grimm places a young Jeffrey Epstein.
This is his origin story, according to Grimm. He lists 3 specific, very heavy-hitting names that Epstein was hanging out with in the 80s.
Who are they?
Okay, first, a guy named Stan Pottinger. He was an attorney who was known to move money for the CIA during the Iran-Contra scandal.
Not a small fish.
No. Second, Adnan Khashoggi.
I definitely recognize that name.
As you should. In the 80s, Adnan Khashoggi was literally the richest man in the world. He was a Saudi arms dealer and a banker. He was the guy who owned the yacht Nabila, which was so enormous it was used in a James Bond movie. Donald Trump eventually bought it.
Wow.
Khashoggi was the absolute nexus of the Iran-Contra money flow. He was the middleman.
And the third name?
Douglas Leese, a major weapons contractor. And Grimm notes that Epstein wasn't just, getting coffee for these guys. He was a protege and a business partner of Leese.
So let's just picture this for a second. You have a young Jeffrey Epstein. He's in his late 20s, maybe early 30s. He's not surrounding himself with stockbrokers or hedge fund guys. He's running with international arms dealers, CIA money movers, and weapons contractors.
Exactly. And Grimm's hypothesis is that this is the origin of the mystery money. Grimm suggests that Epstein's first big fortune didn't come from being a genius stock picker. It came from being the guy who helped move the slush funds. He was using this pre-existing network created by the Israelis and the CIA to facilitate these off-the-books transactions.
And there is one piece of physical evidence from this era that really, really stuck out to me in the research: the passport.
The Austrian passport, yes.
Grimm mentions that in 1982, Epstein obtained a genuine Austrian passport, but with a fake name and a different place of birth.
I really want to stop on this because it's an incredible detail that people sometimes gloss over. You have to think about the year. 1982.
Right, there's no Photoshop, there's no dark web where you can buy a perfect fake ID with Bitcoin.
Exactly. If you or I wanted a fake passport in 1982, we'd have to find some guy in a trench coat in a back alley who, carefully glues your photo over someone else's photo.
And it would look fake.
It would be a forgery. Any decent customs agent who looked at it closely would spot it. But Grimm emphasizes that what Epstein had was a genuine passport. That means the Austrian government itself issued it. It was printed on official government paper, with official stamps, logged in the official government system.
But with a fake name.
With a fake name. You cannot just walk into the Austrian embassy and ask for that. Hi, I'd like a passport, please, but could you put John Doe on it instead of my real name? Thanks.
So how does that happen?
It's tradecraft. That is what intelligence agencies call creating a legend. A verifiable, state-backed cover identity. Grimm argues that for a civilian, a supposed financial advisor, to get a legend passport in 1982 is practically impossible.
Unless
a state intelligence agency called in a favor with another friendly state intelligence agency.
it's sort of the smoking gun that he wasn't just some guy managing money.
Right. It strongly suggests he was already operating in a world where you need cover identities to travel invisibly. Why does a money manager from New York need to travel under a fake name?
He doesn't.
He doesn't. But an arms dealer, a courier for an intelligence agency, they absolutely do.
So we have the arms dealing and the money laundering in the 80s. But Epstein's career evolved, didn't it? He didn't stay in arms dealing forever.
No, he pivoted. And Grimm points out that he transitioned from moving weapons to moving data.
And this is the tech angle. This is where it connects much more directly to the Israeli intelligence theory.
Yes. For this, we have to fast forward into the 90s and the 2000s. Grimm highlights the really close relationship between Epstein and Ehud Barak,
The former prime minister of Israel.
the former prime minister. And we'll get more into their personal relationship in a minute, but what was the business connection?
What were they doing together?
It was all about cyber surveillance. After Barak left office, he and Epstein were effectively partners in the expansion of the Israeli cyber weapons program into the global market.
When you say cyber weapons, what are we talking about exactly? Are these like hacking tools?
We're talking about the commercialization of military-grade spyware. So think about companies like NSO Group and its software Pegasus, which we hear about in the news all the time now.
The stuff that can infect your phone and turn on your camera and microphone without you ever knowing.
That's the one. Grimm explains that this entire industry is overwhelmingly staffed by veterans of a specific Israeli military unit called Unit 8200.
Unit 8200. I hear that term a lot. What is it?
You can think of it as the Israeli equivalent of the NSA, but maybe even more deeply integrated into the private tech sector. It's where the smartest young minds in Israel go for their mandatory military service. They learned elite hacking and signals intelligence.
And when they get out of the military?
They found startups. They take the skills they learned in the military and they turn them into products they can sell.
And Epstein was the middleman for these startups.
Grimm says he was right there every step of the way. He was brokering deals with countries like the Ivory Coast, Nigeria, Mongolia. He was operating in what you could call a semi-official capacity.
So he's going to foreign governments and selling them Israeli spy software.
Exactly. And Grimm makes a really interesting point about why you would need an asset for this kind of work. These are deals that eventually become formal state-to-state agreements. But in the very early stages, you can't just have the Prime Minister of Israel fly to a country they might not have formal relations with and start pitching spy software.
It's too sensitive. It's too politically risky.
It's way too messy. You need someone who can operate in that gray zone. You need a guy who can walk into a room, make the introduction, maybe grease some wheels, all without it being an official diplomatic meeting.
He's the lubricant for the machinery of state intelligence.
That is the argument, precisely. He's not sending an invoice to Mossad for spy services rendered. He's making millions on the back end of these tech deals. But the deals themselves serve the strategic interests of the Israeli state. He's extending Israeli influence into these countries under the guise of private business.
Okay, so that's the asset theory in a nutshell. It connects the money, the passport, and the tech. But let's zoom in on that Israeli connection specifically, because in these documents, the name Ehud Barak keeps coming up over and over and over again.
It really does. And the relationship was clearly very deep. Grimm notes that Barak was a frequent guest of Epstein's. He stayed at his apartment in New York all the time. They were business partners. But there's this one really bizarre detail in the files that the host, Piers Morgan, pointed out.
The email denial. This felt like a scene out of a bad spy comedy.
It really does. So get this. In 2018, and this is long after Epstein's first conviction, by the way, when he was already a globally known registered sex offender, Epstein sends an email to Ehud Barak.
Okay.
And in the email, he specifically asked Barak to clarify in writing that I don't work for Mossad.
That is deeply suspicious.
It's the Streisand effect, right? The classic example. If I walk into a room and the first thing I do is shout, I did not steal the cookies from the cookie jar.
Everyone immediately assumes you stole the cookies.
Of course. Why would you even bring it up? Why would he need that denial in writing?
What's the analysis there?
The analysis suggests that if it weren't a genuine concern, if people weren't already whispering about it, or if it wasn't a potential liability for him, you would never generate a paper trail denying it. It feels like a cover-your-back move. It feels like Epstein knew the walls were closing in, and he was trying to proactively establish a defense. Look, here's an email from a former prime minister proving I'm not a spy.
Which is exactly what a spy would do if they were trying to create a cover story.
It's textbook. Precisely. And it's not just the Barak relationship. Grimm also mentions specific FBI files that were part of this big document dump.
Yes, let's talk about the confidential source, because when you hear a phrase like, the FBI has a file saying he's a spy, that sounds huge.
It sounds huge, but we have to be really careful and contextualize it. So there are reports from the FBI's Los Angeles field office in 2020. They cite a source, a confidential informant, who was apparently convinced that Epstein was a co-opted agent. The source claimed Epstein had been trained as a spy from Mossad.
And I want to play devil's advocate here for a second. FBI files contain all kinds of stuff, right? If I call the FBI tip line right now and say, my neighbor is a Martian, they write it down.
They do. They have to. As the host in the source material points out, raw FBI files can contain tips from literally anyone. It could be a crank caller. It could be a conspiracy theorist with an agenda. Just because a claim is in a file doesn't mean the FBI has verified it as truth. However, when you layer that tip on top of the 1982 passport, and on top of his association with the Iran-Contra arms dealers, and on top of his partnership with Ehud Barak selling cyber weapons, and on top of the fact that his partner, Ghislaine Maxwell, her father, with Robert Maxwell.
Robert Maxwell, yeah, we can't tell this story without him.
You really can't. Robert Maxwell was a massive media tycoon, but it is widely accepted by historians and intelligence experts that he was a super spy. He had deep links to MI6, the KGB, and especially to Mossad.
And when he died, under very mysterious circumstances, falling off his yacht, he was given a state funeral in Israel.
A third state funeral. That is not something that happens for a regular British newspaper publisher.
No.
Former prime minister spoke at his funeral. He was buried on the Mount of Olives. He was treated as a hero of the state. So Ghislaine Maxwell isn't just some socialite who fell in with a bad crowd. She is the daughter of a master spy. She grew up in that world of secrets and intelligence.
So the theory is that it's almost a family business. You have the father, then the daughter, and her partner, Epstein. It creates a picture that is very, very hard to dismiss as just a string of coincidences.
It suggests a lineage, a transfer of tradecraft, of connections, of a certain way of operating in the world.
But, and this is a very big but, we have to hear the other side. Because Alan Dershowitz is sitting at this table in the source debate, and he is not buying any of this for a second.
No, he is not.
Yeah.
Look, whatever you think about Alan Dershowitz as a figure, his argument here is actually very logical and very compelling, even if you don't like the man.
What's the argument?
It all centers on what he calls the get-out-of-jail-free card.
Okay, walk us through that logic.
Dershowitz's premise is simple. Jeffrey Epstein was a narcissist. He was a hedonist who loved luxury. And above all else, he was a coward who was terrified of prison. He was, in Dershowitz's own words, a selfish SOB.
I don't think anyone would argue with that characterization.
No. So Dershowitz asked the logical question. If Epstein was really an intelligence asset for a powerful country, if he really worked for Mossad or the CIA, why did he die in jail? Why did he even go to jail in the first place?
He's saying Epstein would have played that card immediately the second he was in trouble.
Instantly. Dershowitz says it would have been a slam dunk for me. As his lawyer, if Epstein had come to him and said, "Hey, Alan, I'm with Mossad," Dershowitz implies he could have used that as the ultimate leverage.
How?
He could have gone to the prosecutors, gone to the State Department, maybe even gone to the White House and said, look, this guy is vital to national security. He has information we need. We have to make this prosecution go away.
They need to trade his secrets for his immunity. That happens in spy movies all the time, but does it happen in real life?
It absolutely happens. Spies get swapped at the border, assets get protected, charges get quietly dropped in the interest of justice, which is very often code for national security. Dershowitz argues that because Epstein didn't use that defense, and because he was so furious about the 18-month sentence he got in Florida, it proves he wasn't an asset. He had no card to play.
That is a really compelling point. If you have the ultimate trump card, why on earth wouldn't you play it to save yourself?
The only real counter-argument to that is the burn notice theory.
What's that?
It's the idea that if an asset becomes too toxic, too public, the agency just cuts them loose. They deny all knowledge, disavow. Jeffrey who? Never heard of him. The asset becomes a liability.
So maybe he tried to play the card and the phone number was disconnected?
That's the other possibility. But Dershowitz insists that Epstein was desperate enough to try absolutely anything. He says Epstein was asking him, do you have any dirt on Trump? Do you have any dirt on Clinton? He was actively looking for leverage to trade.
So he was looking for leverage on other people, but he didn't offer up his own status as a spy. That suggests to Dershowitz that he didn't have that status to offer.
Exactly. And Dershowitz also disputes the entire timeline of the Israeli connection. Grimm and others talk about these deep, shadowy ties to Israel going back to the 80s. Dershowitz says, no, that just doesn't fit with my personal experience of the man.
What's his version of the timeline, then?
He claims that Epstein didn't really know the key Israeli figures in the 90s. He tells this specific story about Epstein calling him from Paris in the late 90s, saying, I want to go to Israel. I don't know anyone there. Can you introduce me to the 5 smartest people in Israel?
Which would be a very weird request for a secret Mossad agent.
Right.
Hey, can you introduce me to the guys I supposedly work for?
Makes no sense. If you work for them, you already know them. Dershowitz describes setting up a lunch for him with some academics and thinkers, and then afterwards, as a joke, he bought Epstein a T-shirt at a market that said, I'm a member of the IDF.
Wait, really? The evidence of him being in the Israeli military that you sometimes see in photos is a souvenir T-shirt?
According to Dershowitz, yes. He frames it as a complete joke.
Yeah.
A tourist souvenir. To Dershowitz, looking back at photos of Epstein wearing an IDF shirt and people screaming, see, he was a spy, is ridiculous because he personally remembers buying that shirt for him as a gag gift.
That is a fascinating detail. It completely reframes a piece of evidence as a tourist trinket. It really shows how two people can look at the exact same object and see two completely different stories.
It does. It's all about interpretation and context.
Now, we have to address the other part of Dershowitz's defense, which got extremely heated in the source material. This is the legal definition of the crimes. And this is uncomfortable, but we have to parse it to understand his position.
This is a really difficult part of the conversation, but it's absolutely crucial to understanding how the legal defense operates. Dershowitz insists on extreme legal precision, and he gets very, very angry when people use general terms.
He makes a sharp distinction between words like trafficking or pedophilia and what Epstein actually pleaded guilty to in that Florida case.
Right. In that specific Florida case, the charge Epstein pleaded guilty to was soliciting a prostitute who was 17 years and 10 months old and also soliciting another adult woman. Dershowitz's argument is that legally, in that specific case, Epstein was not convicted of pedophilia.
Because the victim was technically very close to the age of consent in Florida at the time.
It's about the specific statutes on the books. Dershowitz is literally shouting in the debate that pedophile is a medical and legal term that, in his view, didn't apply to the specific convictions on the record at that time.
But to the public, and certainly to the other guests on the panel, that sounds like splitting hairs. It sounds like a technicality defense.
It sounds like moral gymnastics. And this is where all the friction comes from. You have the legal reality, what was proven in court, what is written on the piece of paper, versus the moral reality and the public perception. Dershowitz is clinging to the legal reality to defend his performance as a lawyer. He's saying, I did my job based on the charges that were filed.
But to everyone else, it looks like he's minimizing the horror of what happened.
Exactly. And that brings us perfectly to the third voice in this room, Bassem Youssef. Because he is not interested in legal hair splitting at all. He's looking at this entire spectacle and he's almost laughing at it in disgust.
Not at all. Youssef is the voice of the exhausted, cynical public. He looks at this debate, the lawyer shouting about statutes, the journalist connecting dots about old passports, and he basically says, you guys are all missing the point.
He calls it a scavenger hunt.
Yes. He has this incredibly colorful, hilarious, but also deeply cynical critique of the document dump itself. He says something like, hey guys, let the internet figure it out. You want some guy on Reddit cross-referencing flight logs at 2 a.m. while he's eating Cheetos.
I loved that image because it feels so true. That's literally what happens.
Mm-hmm.
It is. Youssef's argument is that the Department of Justice and the FBI have virtually unlimited resources. They have the power to investigate, to arrest, to prosecute. They have the tapes, they have the hard drives, they have everything.
But instead,
They just dump millions of unorganized, heavily redacted files on the public and essentially say, have fun, kids.
he thinks it's a deliberate distraction.
He thinks it's a form of gaslighting. He argues that this chaotic, piecemeal release is a feature, not a bug. It's designed to fatigue us. It's information overload being used as a form of censorship.
That makes a strange kind of sense. If you want to hide a needle in a haystack, that's hard. But if you want to hide a needle in a stack of a million other needles,
It's impossible to find.
Exactly.
Exactly. You create so much noise that the signal is completely lost. Youssef suggests the strategy is to make us chase down 1,000 different leads. Is he a Russian spy? Is he an Israeli spy? Was he CIA? Was he just a rich pervert? That we eventually just give up and stop caring because it's too much work and too confusing?
And he uses this really interesting psychological analogy for it. He calls it the narcissist shared reality.
This is a really powerful concept. He compares the behavior of the state, and he specifically points a finger at Israel here as well, to a narcissist in an abusive relationship. A narcissist creates an alternate reality where they're always the victim or they're just misunderstood, and their goal is to pull you into that distorted reality with them.
So in the Epstein case, the shared reality is this cloud of confusion.
Yes, the constant shifting of narratives, the chaos itself prevents us from seeing the simple underlying truth. Horrific crimes were committed, and almost no one is being held accountable. By keeping us confused, by making us argue about 1982 passports versus 2018 emails, the powerful maintain control and nothing ever changes.
Now, we can't talk about this deep dive without talking about the clash. The personal conflict between Youssef and Dershowitz was, well, intense is putting it mildly.
Oh, it was way beyond intense. It was personal. You could hear the microphones clipping because they were yelling over each other. Youssef wasn't just attacking Dershowitz's arguments. He was attacking his personal integrity.
There was a specific dispute about a settlement. This got really down in the weeds. Youssef claimed Dershowitz had paid a settlement to one of the victims.
Right. Youssef cited a New Yorker article, and he claimed that Dershowitz had paid $1 million to make a case go away.
And Dershowitz just exploded.
He threatened to sue him live on the air. He was absolutely adamant. I paid nothing, not one penny. He claimed it was an insurance settlement that happened between the lawyers and that he personally admitted no guilt and paid no money out of his own pocket.
And in the source material, they actually fact-checked this in real time. Piers Morgan had someone pull up the article.
They did. And this is where the nuance really matters, and where Youssef's broader point about legal truth versus real truth comes right back into focus. The article stated that Dershowitz's insurance company had paid a settlement to the victim's lawyers to make the lawsuit go away.
So Dershowitz was technically right.
Legally and technically, yes. He didn't write a check from his personal bank account. His insurance company did. But Youssef's point was all about the perception of guilt. In the court of public opinion, if money changed your hands to make a very specific, ugly accusation go away, people see that as a settlement.
It's that friction again. The legal truth, I admitted no liability and paid nothing, versus the street truth, money was paid to stop the lawsuit.
Exactly. And Youssef just would not let it go. He kept pushing, accusing Dershowitz of gaslighting the audience by hiding behind these legal technicalities. It was a perfect microcosm of the entire Epstein saga. Legally impenetrable, but morally incredibly murky.
It really highlights why this story is so deeply frustrating for so many people. You have the asset theory, which kind of explains the money and the power in a neat package.
Right.
You have the lawyer defense, which relies on these strict, unsatisfying legal definitions that feel wrong. And then you have the cynic who says the whole system is rigged and is basically laughing at all of us for trying to figure it out.
And that leads us to the bigger picture. Why does any of this still matter? Why are we still talking about this guy years after he died?
Well, Section 5 of our outline asks the why. And I think it all boils down to the protection of the powerful.
I think so too. If you synthesize Grimm's structural analysis with Youssef's deep cynicism, you arrive at the concept of mutually assured destruction, or as it's known in the spy world, compromise.
Compromise material.
Exactly. The idea is that in these upper echelons of global power, you can't be trusted unless you are compromised. If you're a squeaky clean, you're actually dangerous because you have nothing to lose. But if you have secrets, if you have dark deeds on tape,
then you're trustworthy because you can be controlled. You can be destroyed.
precisely, you are owned. Grimm's theory implies that Epstein's properties were wired for surveillance, not just for his own creepy voyeurism, but for a strategic purpose. We know from the FBI raids that there were tapes, there were hard drives. The theory is that intelligence agencies need people like Epstein. They need honey traps. They need a mechanism to entrap princes, prime ministers, and CEOs.
Because once you have them on tape doing something illegal or immoral, you own them. You can influence policy. You can get favorable trade deals. You can get weapons contracts approved.
You can get anything you want. And that, right there, explains the stunning lack of consequences. That explains why the Little Black Book and the flight logs haven't led to a wave of mass arrests.
Piers Morgan brought up some really stark data on this. He called them the prediction markets.
Yes. This is grim, but absolutely fascinating. There are these online markets where people can bet real money on real-world outcomes. The betting market on the question, will anyone else go to jail in connection with the Epstein case, dropped from a 48% likelihood to just 17% in a very short span of time.
That is a staggering drop in confidence. That is the sound of the public collectively losing hope that justice will ever be served.
It is. It's the market saying, it's over, no one else is going down for this.
Yeah.
And despite all the promises of total transparency, what we're actually getting are heavily redacted documents. The names that are released are often people we already knew about or people who are already dead. The truly powerful, the ones who might still be useful or dangerous, they remain protected in the shadows.
It's the difference between true transparency and a document dump. Transparency implies clarity. A dump implies chaos.
And chaos is the ultimate cover-up. If you want to hide one specific tree, the best way to do it is to plant a dense forest all around it.
So, after all this, where does this leave us? We've looked at the spy theory, the legal defense, and the gaslighting accusation.
I think at the end of the day, the asset theory is the only one that really explains all the anomalies. It's the only theory that provides a rational explanation for the Austrian passport. It's the only one that explains the origin of the money from the Iran-Contra days. It's the only one that explains the decades of protection he received from law enforcement.
Even if there isn't a literal membership card to Mossad, even if he didn't have a badge and a number.
Right. He doesn't have to be an employee to be an asset. He just has to be useful. He operated in that perfect gray zone where criminals and governments overlap to do the dirty work that states can't do. Officially money laundering, arms dealing, entrapment.
It's a world that most of us like to pretend doesn't exist. We want to believe that the governments are the good guys and the criminals are the bad guys, and there's a clear line between them.
But the Epstein story forces us to look right at that messy intersection. It forces us to acknowledge that sometimes the state needs the criminal.
So here's the provocative thought we want to leave you with today. We've talked about the files. We've talked about this public scavenger hunt.
If the government really truly wanted to solve this case and bring everyone involved to justice, they could. They have the tapes. They have the server logs. They have forensic accountants who could trace every dollar. So why crowdsource the investigation to a bunch of people on Reddit eating Cheetos?
Is it possible that the chaos of information, the overwhelming dump of redacted files, is actually the ultimate shield? And in a world where everyone is watching everyone, where compromise has become the real currency of power...
Is anyone truly free to lead? Or is every powerful person just one leaked tape away from total destruction? And if that's the case, who is actually running the world? The leaders we see on TV or the unseen people holding the tapes?
Something to think about. Thanks for diving in with us.
See you next time.